Good evening. This is the February 16th, 2022 public meeting of the East Cambridge Neighborhood Conservation District Study Committee. I'm Charlie Sullivan, Executive Director of the Cambridge Historical Commission. Before beginning the meeting, I'll first confirm the members of the committee are present and can hear me. Members, when I call your name, please say present. Ronald Kramer.
Present.
Thank you. William Dines.
Present.
Francesca Gordini.
Present.
Valerie Reese will not be joining us. Gavin Cleespies.
Present.
Paula Paris.
Present.
Kyle Sheffield. Doesn't look like he's here. So we have 5 members present, which represents a quorum of the 7 members. And I'll now call the meeting to order. The city staff, when I call your name, please say present. Sarah Burks, Preservation Planner.
Present.
Eric Hill, Survey Director.
Present.
Pardon me while I read this boilerplate announcement. You're all sick of this, but here we go. This public meeting is being conducted remotely consistent with Governor Baker's executive order of March 12th, 2020, due to the current state of emergency in the Commonwealth due to the outbreak of the COVID-19 virus. In order to mitigate the transmission of the COVID-19 virus, we've been advised and directed to suspend in-person public gatherings, and as such, the governor's order suspends the requirement of the open meeting law to have all meetings in a publicly accessible physical location. Further, all members of public bodies are allowed and encouraged to participate remotely. The order allows public bodies to meet remotely so long as reasonable public access is afforded so that the public can follow along with the deliberations of the meeting. For this meeting, the study committee is convening by Zoom webinar. Please note that we are recording the meeting and will share the recording files with CityView 22 for later broadcast. The agenda is posted on the Historical Commission's website on the East Cambridge NCD study page. We'll screen share the staff slides via Zoom during the meeting and add them to the webpage after the meeting. The URL for the NCD study page is https://tinyurl.com/ECNCD study. Meeting ground rules. The committee members, please mute your audio to prevent background noise distractions, and remember to unmute yourself before beginning to speak. Please speak clearly to help the staff who prepare the minutes. Please identify yourself each time you speak, as some attendees may be joining us with audio-only connections. This meeting will conclude no later than 8 p.m. or 8:07 p.m. to stay within the 2-hour broadcast window. After committee members, there will be a staff presentation at various points in the presentation. We'll pause for discussion. After committee members have asked questions and had discussion, we'll have time for public comment. Please use the raise hand button in Zoom if you'd like to speak. Only comments related to tonight's agenda will be allowed if they're out of order. I may ask you to focus your comments on the matter at hand. Derogatory remarks and personal attacks will not be allowed. Staff will call on each speaker by name and ask you to unmute your audio and state your full name and address. Depending on the time available, we will cut speakers off after 2 minutes, or notify you at least. We recommend sending comments to staff via email at ehill@cambridgema.gov so we can forward them to committee members prior to the next meeting. Okay, I'm getting faster and faster at that. I hope the public could understand it. So I'm going to share my screen and then bring you up to date on what's been happening around here with East Cambridge. So as you all know, we're studying the possibility of a neighborhood conservation district for East Cambridge. Tonight, we're going to review the draft preliminary report. We're now in the 2nd year of the study. Good Lord, how many, I'll take that back. I can't count how many months or years we've been doing this, but we've reached the point where we have a draft preliminary report that is the next step, for which will be to take it out for public discussion and then send to the city, to the Cambridge Historical Commission for a public hearing, and if they agree, to send it to the City Council for designation. When we've reviewed the latest draft of the preliminary report, if we have time, we'll talk about neighborhood outreach and future directions. So we've all seen these slides. These are the same slides I've had in every presentation for months and months, defining neighborhood conservation districts, a local tool for neighborhood preservation, quite different from historic districts, and that they're tailored to protect the features, publicly visible exterior features of existing buildings that the study committee deems to be important to preserve or conserve the significant buildings and features of the neighborhood. A feature of the proposed regulation is the National Register of Historic Places, which is a state and federal designation that actually has no regulatory authority for most purposes, but there are parts of the proposed study area are on the National Register, and the committee has come up with a scheme that would review alterations to National Register buildings more closely than those elsewhere that are not on the National Register. And then the boundaries are still as they were petitioned in 2019. That's the blue line that traces the perimeter, traditional perimeter of the residential neighborhood of East Cambridge from Monsignor O'Brien Highway to south of Charles Street. The committee has looked at these boundaries and decided to keep them as they were originally proposed. So the last month, the committee reviewed mostly reviewed a section of the report that discussed the conduct of the study and the contrasting views that were expressed by members of the public. There were concerns about that text and about the apparent absence of or strong references to the alternative views that some members of the public and indeed of the committee have with regard to the desirability or context of the conservation district. So we've gone through the draft. I've had suggestions and suggested text from 3 members of the study committee, a member of the public, and members of the staff, and I've taken all of that and made edits and amendments and changes to the draft for the committee's consideration. None of this is set in stone yet, and I would like to see a consensus. It'd be wonderful if we could reach a consensus at the end of this meeting to put the preliminary report to bed and move on to the next steps. But hey, what's another month more or less? We've been doing this for quite a while, so it's now part of our daily habits, isn't it? So this just summarizes the sections of the report that have been edited. The summary, the part 1, part 3, and the appendices. And I'm going to go through this in detail and show you the pages that have been changed. When we get down to those sections, the yellow highlighting indicates language that was new last month that we're still debating. And then the red type, which can be additions or strike-throughs, that's new language and edits since you last saw this report. So let's start off with the summary. This is a 1-page sort of executive summary at the very beginning of the report that we had a comment that it presented an unduly rosy view of the benefits of the conservation district. So there was some language suggested for this, which I took in hand, condensed, and added this statement. After we talk about the study process and determining the appropriate jurisdiction, et cetera, the goal statement. So it's quite clear that the committee, that there is a proposal for an NCD, and then the proposed paragraph that I'm proposing is that some in the neighborhood, including a study committee, and we could say at least one study committee if there's more, disagree with these findings. They fear that the unintended consequences of a neighborhood conservation district might include increased costs, the prospect of deferred maintenance, the stifling of creativity, unnecessarily long delays, and arbitrary and capricious decisions by an NCD commission. So I view this as sort of like the warnings on a cigarette packet. This is important stuff, and it's important for us to present a balanced view of the differing opinions that have been expressed. So let's see. I guess we'll pause for a second. If we can approve this tonight if you're comfortable with it, or if you have issues with the language, you can raise your hand. We'll discuss it. I don't want to rush the process. God knows this process has not been rushed, but in any event, it's up to the committee how you want to consider this. So
Hey,
if there are
Charlie,
no
this
comments
is,
at the moment, Ron Kramer. Yes, sir.
Ron Kramer, 501 Cambridge Street, study committee member. Thank you for pointing out, Charlie, that this is important stuff. I agree. I believe I was the author of the original paragraph. Is that true, Charlie? And you condensed it, as you said?
Yeah, you suggested some language and I took off from there.
Okay. So, Charlie, you've cut my language about in half. And I would ask the respect that you include at least I get to read my language into the record so that the study committee can vote on the original language that's not condensed, and you actually changed the meaning inadvertently of my language in your edit. So may I read that to the public and the committee?
Sure. I would point out that I sent all your original language to the study committee, and it was posted on the website. So sure, go ahead.
Okay. So the language I proposed is as follows. While the CHC and majority of the study committee believe they are recommending a non-intrusive neighborhood conservation district, others in the neighborhood, including a study committee member, disagree. They cite a clear lack of community consensus and a non-transparent and deeply flawed study process. And they fear many unintended consequences that an EC-NCD would bring, including increased costs that would negatively affect housing costs and our community's diversity, deferred maintenance, a stifling of creativity, unnecessarily long delays, the dangers of vague and contradictory nature of the stated NCD goals. So I would like to vote on my original language and having it all included in this paragraph, Charlie.
Gavin's got his hand up.
Thanks, Charlie. So I was wondering, this is more of a question about process. I think that it's important to acknowledge that there is a difference of opinions. But I think in some ways, this statement weights Ron's opinion more heavily than others' opinions because it's highlighting one difference and not what the consensus of other members are. Would there be a way to have Ron's statement and a statement or multiple statements from other study committee members included? I'm just wondering, like, if it would just be simpler to say there was a difference of opinion, please see Appendix A. We can include a statement by Ron and then another statement with X number of signatures and or X number of separate comments.
That might be a way to handle it. You know, drafted this statement to be more balanced, I would say, and objective. If that's not too offensive, but just to say that there have been concerns, and Mr. Kramer's concerns are reflected elsewhere in the document. It is a can of worms here, a classic can of worms, but if we want to open this to conflicting statements by, or not conflicting, but statements by individual members, the appendix would be an excellent place to put those, and I'd be happy to add a footnote here to that effect. We have opinions and we have polemics, and honestly, some of the language that we've gotten into in this many month process borders on polemics, and the polemics are not this is not the place for polemics. This is supposed to be an objective and balanced representation of the discussion, without drawing value judgments about various aspects of it. So I would say that the committee wants to represent, to include Ron's language, that we could put that with the rest of his statement in the appendix, where I've already reserved a spot for his discussion of his experiences in Belmont and on Cape Cod.
So I just want to point out before we vote that these views are not those alone of myself. They are many others that have been involved in the process, including many members of our community. So I don't want to be singled out as the sole person here with these concerns. And I don't see the harm in including them here. I mean, the whole document
this is Bill.
95% pro ECNCD, so I don't see the harm in including this paragraph here. I don't know what you're all afraid of.
This is Bill. I'm not afraid
Bill?
of anything, but yeah, this is Bill. Can you hear me, Charlie?
Yes.
Yeah, I think your language summarizes exactly the feelings of the opposition and some of the concerns that they have. And I don't see any reason to get into the weeds on why the opposition feels the way they do. I think this is succinct. It's in the summary section, and I would vote to keep your language in over Ron's language. I don't see any reason that we need to put this in the appendix. We already have alternate views of the dissension against the conservation district being included in the appendix potentially. And we started off this process with simple things like concerns and objections to the conservation district. We included those. I think we've been very fair in including the opposition's viewpoint. And I think your paragraph summarizes exactly what that is. And I think it should stand, and I would vote in favor to keep your language in.
Okay, Francesca?
Well, I find myself to be quite in agreement with Gavin's statement. At the same time, I thought that, the place to decide whether there's a consensus, a majority or not, was going to be the polling, and finding space for melodrama in the document takes away from the final goal. If we need to instruct the residents, homeowners, renters, about what is going to happen in the neighborhood with or without a conservation district, I think we could just stick to what is architecture, urban planning, ideas of, we can certainly state that, I think it's pretty, nobody here sat on this committee, and I speak for myself, considering I'm possibly the only person that doesn't have a leg in the game. I don't have a business. I don't have properties in this neighborhood. I simply decided to take part of this committee because architecture is my passion and it's my daily jam. I'm a renter that shares the issue of being pushed out by increased costs. But it's not the the board does not have any jurisdiction on the economy that we're all facing. I think it's just all unnecessary, petty drama. And why do we want to waste readers' time in talking about this silliness?
Okay, thank you, Francesca. Paula,
You're welcome.
opinion about this text?
I think it should be noted that there's differences of opinion, but I would actually, I agree with Gavin. I think put the full text representation in the appendix or in the other section, so that this document actually focuses on the context, and then the any opposition, disagreements, barriers, challenges. I think that should go. I think that should all go together.
Okay, so
I kind of think that this is, yeah, I kind of think that anything more than this is a distraction, but in fairness, to present the full the text, and if it in fact is it is representational of several opinions, then I think it should go in the back and just noted and footnoted and referenced.
right. So keep in mind, this is one paragraph in a one-page statement. So the whole idea is to keep a summary succinct. It's not a place to go overboard with complicated language. So I think what we want to do is we'll go through the rest of the draft where a lot of the Mr. Kramer's ideas have been inserted. And when we get to the end, maybe we can come back to this idea of whether we put larger statements in the appendix.
So Charlie,
So
before we
I'm going
leave,
to,
Charlie, before
Yeah.
we leave the language, it was referred to earlier as your language. I just want to point out that it was your condensed version of my language. And the only difference between what you have here and what I proposed was that you have decided to drop the following concerns, got knifed away. A clear lack of community consensus, a non-transparent and deeply flawed study process, and then possible negative effects on housing costs and the community's diversity. So that's what is cut from the original language. It doesn't seem like that much to keep it in its original format.
Ron, this is Bill.
Well-
I don't believe we have any idea what the
go ahead.
community consensus is right now, so I don't think including that is appropriate or warranted. I think this summary is very succinct and to the point that there's objections to this and concerns. And I think the way the language is now should either stay the way it is or removed entirely.
Yeah, I disagree.
and I would point out that when we start talking about a flawed process, that's a really personal opinion. It may be shared by multiple people, but this is not the place for that kind of commentary. So, I acknowledge there are disagreements. If you want to see the details, go to the appendix. So I'm going to move on here. The next amendment was, we heard from a member of the public who pointed out the importance of a number of stone retaining walls that were constructed in the 19th century on either side on the streets on either side of Cambridge Street, and that these are significant features. They are in fact structures in the definition of the conservation district, and that account should be taken of them. So I've added a paragraph and a photograph to reflect that. I hope that doesn't require discussion. Moving right along. You move to page 39. I've had extended correspondence with the Community Development Department's statistician who helped us on the rental analysis study. And whereas there were a number of comments about the completeness, the timeliness, the adequacy of the study, he takes exception to all of those things. The commentary appeared to quote him in using various words that he did not find in the video. And so he made simply one suggestion, one change to the conclusion of the rental analysis study, that we change the sentence that says studies of the effect of NCDs on property values and rents in Cambridge suggest, not show, but suggest that NCDs do not materially affect property values or rents. And then he suggested that the footnote be amended. And this is not what's in the draft I distributed. This change came through today. At least one member of the committee disagreed with this characterization of the results of the rental study and believes that more analysis is needed before drawing conclusions, which I think is a fair statement. So, you know, I'm speaking for community development staff and myself, we're sticking with our conclusions and his conclusions on this study. If you want to debate, you know, statistics, you know what the sayings are about statistics. And so, you know, we were asked to make this analysis. We did it with the best talent that the city has. There's certainly plenty of room to question it, but we've got a strong pushback. And so I'm suggesting we stick with just these amendments to the draft. Any comments? Paula? Francesca?
Looks good to
Comment?
me.
Yep.
I would say, looks
Okay.
looks good to move on.
Bill? Bill?
Oh, it's fine with me, Charlie, move on.
Gavin?
Fine with me.
Okay. Ron, you were first last time, so I put you last this time.
Just have a question, Charlie. Are you keeping the line that says NCDs do not materially affect property values or rents?
This is I sent the entire section off for commentary, and this is the suggestion.
Right, but I think that's different from what I had before. Do you remember the do not materially affect property values or rents line?
That's right in front of, that's right on the screen. Yeah.
Yeah, so under the conclusion, right?
Right here. Yeah, this is the
Okay.
conclusion.
Okay,
Okay.
well, seems like the study committee wants to maintain that conclusion or that suggestion, so I say let's move on.
Okay. Then it was suggested that we refer to the fact that the East Cambridge Business Association wrote the committee on a couple of occasions expressing concerns about the district. I put in this language and added their letters to the appendices. I don't see any hands up about this. So,
Yeah, Charlie, I have my hand up. I don't have a
Oh,
problem
sorry.
with this. I don't have a problem with this, but I sent you a request to include the East Cambridge Planning Team letter of support for the Conservation District to
Yeah,
be included.
yeah, you did, and I haven't included it.
So I would suggest that maybe on page Roman numeral 5, which is the table of contents, that a statement be put in there that there's a letter of support from the East Cambridge Planning Team. And then include that letter in the appendix along with the business association letter on page 79.
Yep, thanks. I forgot about that.
Sorry, Charlie, just a question for you. Will the letters that we all saw during, especially the earlier Zoom meetings, in support or against Conservation District, what would happen to those? Will those be included or not? What's usually?
Well, we've, this proposal isn't fully baked yet.
Okay.
And, I'm hesitant to put in letters going too far back because the terms of the jurisdiction, nature of the jurisdiction has changed, has evolved. And actually, I think we would, if and when this report is approved by the study committee, we'll then go back to the planning team and we might solicit another letter from them that might be somewhat different. So
No, I understand. I just was asking out of pure sincere curiosity.
Yeah, sure. I mean, we want to be inclusive, but we want comments to be
course.
relevant to the current proposal.
That makes sense. That makes total sense. Thank you.
Yep. Okay. Moving right
Charlie, I just
along.
thought that was relevant because the East Cambridge Planning Team kind of oversees the majority of Cambridge Street within the planning team's purview. So I thought that was appropriate to request that be included.
We will do that. I'm making a note. Okay. Now, so in this section where this convention is, the yellow language is language that we discussed last month. And the red language, the strike through and the plain red type is our additions, alterations, edits. So, I mean, we discussed this March 2020 meeting at great length. I've been back and forth and listened to everybody. I decided to take out white property owners. It just doesn't seem relevant. And it does seem a little inflammatory. And then this sentence, tempers flared on both sides and city staff were unable to regain control of the meeting, which was concluded 10 minutes early. I thought that that language was suggested and that really summarized what happened. So I substituted that sentence for the following struck out sentence. So what do people think about this?
Well, Charlie, I think this is a very important that we get this right. It was a pivotal, very important meeting. It was emotional because it touched a lot of people. And I think that the language that you've decided to keep against my recommendation, I think it's a mistake. I think it oversimplifies. It almost makes a straw man argument. It identifies one narrow part of the opposition and then tries to dismiss it as people from out of the jurisdiction, and therefore makes it irrelevant, not to be counted. And I don't think that's a fair description of what happened. And I've asked you to consider the detailed email we all received the following day from a East Cambridge neighborhood citizen who was there. What you've written here, Charlie, I don't think you were at that meeting. This doesn't accurately reflect my experience. So I thought I proposed very safe language that acknowledged that tempers were flared. I think you took my line, tempers flared on both sides. But to single out them as just one idea and dismiss them for not being from the neighborhood, I don't think that's fair at all. That's not what happened. Wasn't my experience, wasn't the experience of the person that wrote it. Detailed email to all of us. And I would like to omit all of the part that talks about the primary contention seemed to be what it seemed to be, what their primary attack was, and the fact that they were from out of the jurisdiction. I'd like to get rid of all of that. And I have proposed new language that I think is more accurate. It's very short, so I'll read it now. Many in attendance were under the impression that the meeting would be more interactive, that they would be allowed to ask questions and voice their concerns regarding a potential ECNCD. When it became clear that attendee participation would be limited due to the length of the slide presentation, many attendees, having made prior arrangements and taken time out of their days in order to weigh in on the issues, grew frustrated. And you did include my line, tempers flared on both sides and city staff were unable to regain control of the meeting, which concluded 10 minutes early. Many attendees left the meeting frustrated, feeling that their input was not welcomed or valued by the process. I think that's a critical part to keep.
Okay, Gavin, you have your hand up.
So I don't have a huge number of comments. I actually think that how this is written is relatively good. I certainly was at that meeting. It was certainly an unpleasant meeting where tempers flared. I would say that the statement that the sign-in sheet included a dozen attendees who lived outside the study area is a factual statement. I would change maybe a dozen to 12. Just because if it's a factual number, we can say that it's a factual number. And if there are 12 people who signed in with addresses outside of the study area, that's not an opinion. It's a factual statement. In terms of other changes, I would say that I would take out the word older, an attempt by older property owners. I think the issue is frankly that the argument would be that this is property owners enriching themselves. I think older is a really subjective statement, and I don't think that what one person defines as older is necessarily what another person defines as older. And I think we should go to as clear factual information as possible. I don't really support Ron's suggested language. I would also say that making a statement that attendees were under the impression that they had a chance to participate is a presumption. We don't know what the attendees attending presumed. So I would stick to a relatively factual statement to the best that we can.
Okay, Paula? You muted, Paula.
I just had to unmute. So once again, I agree with Gavin because he spoke before me. So thank you, Gavin. It wouldn't be the first time. To strike the word older, I actually think that the sentence about the sign-in sheet for the meeting, I think it should be, the first clause should be included, maybe take off many of whom participated in the disruptive behavior. I think you've covered the disorderliness in the a couple of sentences before that. And it was some members of the public, whether they lived in the study area or not. The meeting did become disruptive, and I was at that meeting, and it was quite disruptive. And personally, I felt unsafe. So that's my experience.
Okay. Francesca?
Sorry, was trying to unmute. Once again, I second Gavin entirely. I'm sure I couldn't have spoken any, phrased any better. I mean, I feel like if we boil the concept down, what remains is there's a number of people that are afraid this is gonna increase property value to a point where rental is not gonna be sustainable. And there's also the other side, the flip side of the medal is that there's a number of people that fear that new development will, especially if uncontrolled, and is gonna reach the same point. As I said, I would like to stick to factual things as opposed to dramatic statements, which I think are completely unnecessary and out of place. Also, because if we need to name things, let's just name numbers. I do recall somebody was taking part of participations and who was who, where, and I think that personally, being part of the neighborhood as a resident makes a difference. So if people that were that participated and were against it reside outside of the boundaries, I mean, anyway, I'll leave it there. Thank you.
Bill?
No, Charlie, I just have mixed feelings about that statement. I know there's people in the neighborhood that wanted to be accurate and include the older white people statement, but I think that is somewhat inflammatory and probably deserves to be maybe blocked out. But I know there are people that felt offended by those comments that were being made at that meeting and on Twitter shortly thereafter, repeating those comments and that rhetoric. And it's not the only place that those comments are being made recently. So that's all I have to say. I wouldn't have a problem maybe striking that out, keeping it out, but I wanted to, for the record, make it known that people within the community felt very offended by those words and felt it should be included in the text. And that's all I have to say.
Thank you.
I think you
Eric,
received
you
some of those comments in writing.
We have. Eric, you were at the meeting and I think you wrote this description originally. Do you have any comments on this?
I have a question.
I'm sorry, Eric's got the floor.
Oh, I was just going to say, I think the current iteration makes sense. You know, it says, you know, tempers did flare on both sides, which is true, and this is kind of in the vein of what Gavin was saying. Stick to kind of facts, not you know, emotions necessarily. So I think we have the physical sign-in sheet, so we can definitely update you know, the number of people who might have been outside of the study area that signed in, and I'll leave that at that.
Okay, Francesca, sorry.
I think I lost my stream of thought. Oh, are we, the phrase that's not highlighted, is that supposed to remain? I'm not understanding. Tempers
the
flared
tempers
on
flared
both
on-
sides. Is that
Yeah,
supposed to?
that's language that I edited and put in.
Okay.
it's intended to be factual.
Yes, okay.
Yeah.
Also,
Okay.
just a comment. Does the city expect that every study that's ever presented is a result of a kumbaya process?
I'm sorry, say it again.
I mean, I find that it should be pretty normal that a study that gets presented to the city is not necessarily a result of a kumbaya process. I find that it's a little bit silly that we have to go deep in the weeds to decide who was where.
Yeah, yeah, but the objective is that to the extent possible, we have a study committee that has a consensus.
Yes.
And so, study committees, do what they want to do, but it's pretty clear that the majority of the study committee members are, I think, in favor of proceeding with this project, but there are legitimate criticisms that perhaps opposing views haven't been well represented. So I want to make sure that is to the extent possible, those views are represented. And if the entire committee can, in the end, have a kumbaya moment, that's a definite plus. But remember, this is a preliminary report.
Yes.
If you approve it, it'll go out to the public. We'll get comments from all sides on all aspects of it. It'll get changed again. And then, before it goes ahead. So this is still, it's not early days, but this thing is still fluid and will be fluid until after we go through the public process and bring it back to the committee for further work.
Thank you, Charlie.
Charlie, could I make one comment in response to
Please.
some of the proposed language from Ron? And from the staff perspective, I was also there, and the language you had, Ron, about people not having a chance to make comments. Part of that was due to the fact, or that the presentation was long. The presentation was long because there were near constant interruptions with procedural questions or questions of when are we going to get to this? When are we going to get to that? And it was nearly impossible to get through the presentation. There would have been a lot more time for public comment at the end if A, it hadn't gotten disorderly, and B, people had let the staff finish their presentation uninterrupted. So that's just my 2 cents. Thank you.
So Sarah, thank you for pointing that out. I think we're making a big mistake by not including, by narrowing the scope, painting the straw man as this angry mob of outsiders that had this one issue, and they called old white property owners greedy, and they don't live in the study area, and that was their primary contention. I think we're doing the whole thing a disservice. This was a pivotal meeting because it was the last time that we could feel the people. We were all in the same room. We all felt the energy. We felt the frustration, and it's understandable, Sarah, that the disruptions did make the presentation longer. I do understand that, and I respect that. But what you're doing is you're painting a different picture, an inaccurate picture, a petty picture, I would add, and it's an unfair picture. So I don't approve of this language. I think it's an oversimplification that serves the purposes of people that want the ECNCD to continue.
Ron, in all due respect, nothing productive happened at that meeting at all. The staff were unable to present their update on where we stood as a study group and what the aims of the conservation district were. Bedlam broke out, comments were made on both sides.
The people were
And-
led to believe, Bill, that they would have a voice and they were denied that voice. So they got frustrated. And a lot of
There are,
people left the
Paul, there are
process.
procedures for public meetings, Ron. It can't be a free-for-all like a lot of the people that were there for the first time started screaming and shouting and yelling and wanting to know this and wanting to know this, and they disrupted the whole meeting and nothing productive happened at that meeting.
Right.
We
No,
went
it was
almost
shut
2
down,
hours of nothing.
And they were
and
shut
it was
out.
Shut down.
And then everything went on Zoom. And now that,
Yeah,
now
so
that
how
we're
is
in
that-
this insular column
Why
of
was
video
that
people,
such a
we can't
critical
hear them.
point in this whole process? Nothing productive
You're doing them a
happened.
disservice.
Okay,
Ron,
one at a time, please, and then let's move on.
That's
So-
all I
Well,
have to
one
say,
more thing.
Charlie.
Okay,
Ron, that was
Francesca?
possibly the second meeting that we all had in person. We didn't have more than 2. Clearly, there was no intention of listening because that was supposed to be an instructory meeting explaining what the history of the neighborhood was, and there was clearly no intention on a certain side for even being part of a civil listening operation. Not to mention, we had another in-person meeting at which you were present, and we had a pretty good and productive walk through the neighborhood. Where were all these people? Were they interested in participating? I don't think so. I'll leave it there.
okay. I'm gonna call for a timeout here. If you would indulge me for a moment. Let me find, I don't have it on the screen. Okay. So I'm going to edit this paragraph. Oh, it's not showing my changes here. Just a second. This is not going to take long. Okay, this is what I would suggest we do. Can you see this? Oops. So I took the sign-in sheet clause, moved it up to where the 40 signed in and others also in attendance. The sign-in sheet for the meeting, including a dozen attendees who lived outside of the study area. And then I took out the rest of the last sentence, and I took out older and white. So it now reads, the study represented an attempt by property owners to prevent new development for their own enrichment.
All right.
Charlie, can you add something as to why they were frustrated? Anything?
You got a language? You got a word?
Well, I gave you language. You deleted it all.
Well, I'm asking you again.
Okay, yes, I do.
I think that we're presuming that we know why people were frustrated.
Yeah, I
well,
think
we
this
can
is
say-
getting out of hand.
Well, wait a
Right,
minute.
Getting
We
crazy.
all of us got a letter from an East Cambridge resident outlining clearly why they were frustrated.
A East Cambridge resident, not all of the people who are in this meeting. I think generalizing from that one email is not a representation of all the voices of the people who are at that meeting
So it
or
should
the
be
voices of
ignored.
East Cambridge.
Okay,
I
got it.
think it is dangerous to assume that you know why people were doing things.
And it's dangerous to label them all as what is convenient for the East.
And by the
Citizens.
way, the author of that letter does not even live within the proposed conservation district.
Okay, we're headed towards personalities here. I don't want to go there. This is my suggested draft of this. I don't want to presume to understand all the reasons why people were upset. I can take out, we could take out this sentence entirely, rather than try to add.
Yeah, please
other
do.
reasons.
Please remove that. Please remove that.
Well, I think before you do that, Charlie, I think you should poll a study group whether that should be removed or not.
Yep, what do you think?
I think it should stay.
Gavin?
I think that it's a statement of why people are objecting. I don't think that that's contentious.
Paula?
I think that the concept should stay. I'm thinking of slightly different wording, which either says a major contention or a major contention rather than the primary contention. That was what was voiced there. There may have been other contentions, but that was what was voiced at that meeting.
Good point.
I would like to point out that the contention was voiced. I wouldn't want to put a quantity on it because we don't have the quantities yet. We yet have to do a poll. If we want to talk about numbers, then let's just put the number. We can count. Somebody was taking like a list of attendees and where they resided. Was it you, Gavin? I don't remember. There was definitely somebody that had a list and was writing down. If we have meeting included a dozen attendees, is it a dozen? Is it 13? Is it 11? How many? Let's just write it down, and maybe we can also write down how many people attended in its entirety, if we want to.
I think that's what
That's it.
Gavin had
The other
suggested before,
statement
was
for
to
me
get the
should
number.
stay. I would say I would take out major. Contentions of the opponents seem to be, and that's about it.
Yeah, even better.
Not major, minor, who's more important than somebody else. This is not the game we're
Good.
playing. We're trying to do factuals, and I think it actually serves a disservice to all the people that were contentious because it depicts them as extremely rude and disrespectful. So let's be kind to them.
Okay,
I like that.
so I think that's where the paragraph stands. And so let's move on. What I'd like to do is, before we go to public comment, I just want to get through all of these changes to the report because they all support each other in some way. So I'm going to go back to the slideshow. Okay. Then we had this whole section about matters of public concern. And Mr. Kramer took issue with it. And as I was looking at it, I realized it was in the wrong place in the text, and also that it was not balanced, and that we had never summarized or tried to summarize the public's arguments or support in favor of a conservation district. So I asked, I asked the staff, and we got an unsolicited contribution from I think a couple of members of the committee, and came up with this list, which is not, I don't elaborate on, but simply summarizes, categorizes the several distinct arguments that we saw people were making in support of the proposed district. That it would conserve significant structures and architectural character of the historic core of East Cambridge. It would highlight the sociocultural history of the neighborhood and associated building histories, protect generational ownership and naturally occurring affordable housing, support smart growth, even the playing field with developers and provide a forum for public questions and comments on redevelopment projects. Support environmental sustainability through renovation, adaptive reuse, and sustainably designed additions to historic buildings. Preserve existing public open spaces and encourage revitalization of retail storefronts and commercial design along Cambridge Street. So these are points that were floating around in the discussion all through our discussion about goals and guidelines, and were incorporated, many of them, in the proposed goals. But I thought it was important to summarize the arguments in favor of the district and then move on to the arguments against. So I'm going to come back to this. Let me keep going. Then also it occurred to us on the city staff that neighborhood conservation would be consistent with objectives of the city's, the Envision Cambridge plan. And not to read all of this, but the language, there's language in the plan that seems applicable to conservation districts. That existing buildings that support the historic urban character of an area should be preserved and repurposed where practical, and new development should complement that character. That Cambridge has many historically significant places, including individual landmarks and districts that communicate our connections to the past. New development should not disrupt this historical continuity while accommodating changes that meet our present and future needs. And continue to update area and neighborhood specific design guidelines to ensure that new developments, urban design outcomes complement their neighborhood context, and the review process is more predictable to stakeholders and developers. And finally, improve public open space network by preserving, maintaining, and enhancing existing open spaces. So this is not something we had discussed before, but it came to us that the Envision Cambridge process that took several years that and concluded not long ago was really applicable to this. So we've come back and discussed this. So then this is the language that we had been debating last month about housing affordability, about the Cambridge Street Business District, about the cost of materials and labor, cost of professional representation by applicants, the possibility of arbitrary capricious commissions. These are all points that that we on the CHC staff summarized from previous discussion. Mr. Kramer requested that we include a text representing alternative viewpoints. And so the text continues right along on pages 58 and 59 with Ron's complete text that includes his statement, and he can speak to this in a moment, with his take on the increased financial costs, the negative impact on housing affordability and diversity, on the local business community, loss of enjoyment and use due to long delays, the stifling of creativity and deferral of necessary upkeep, unintended consequences and potential for arbitrary and capricious NCD decisions, and the lack of transparency, legitimacy, and community consensus for an NCD. And that's it. So I'll go back. Where were we? Okay, I'm back to here. And members of the public, we will have time for public comment. But I want everybody to be thinking of the entirety of the report, whether to include, this edition of prose, whether to include in some entirely or in some form Ron's statement of alternative viewpoints. It's all grist for the mill. So I'm going to ask Paula to start off.
Okay, I'm a little confused. Was this was this in the revisions or are we seeing this for the first time? I'm seeing this for the
This
first
was
time.
in the revisions that we sent out. You know, this now, it's the document we sent out last week that's now on the website.
Okay,
It's not new tonight.
Okay, it's new to me though. I have Ron's on 58 and 59. I think this should be included. Placement, I guess, would be my question, is just since I don't have the doc, I have all the other pages, but I don't have this one. Where that goes and whether the pros in section E, whether the cons will actually follow it. Is that the intent?
Yeah, this section starts on page 54.
Okay. This is where
And
yeah, this is where my printer jammed, I think, and I didn't actually
no.
end up
Okay.
getting I didn't end up getting
Yeah.
the pages that I thought I was printing out. So after I dug them out of the jam. No, it's all right. I think I've got everything else. So
basically, what I've got on the screen is the entire section E from page 54 to 59. So I'll just run through it quickly. So it lists the pros. And then it discusses the Envision Cambridge plan. And then it picks up the language that we discussed last month, where the staff and I summarized the concerns about housing affordability, business district, et cetera, et cetera. And then it goes on to Ron Kramer's points. And so all of this language is in one section.
right, okay, this
is the whole section.
I have from 58, I have 58 and 59, so.
Oh dear. So our deathless prose did not survive the printer. That's a shame.
Oh, so, well, no, I can read it. I can read it right now, and I don't see the language isn't foreign. I just didn't have an opportunity to review this particular one. I did look at Ron's, but I think they should be in the same format. I think Ron's, with all due respect, are a little long.
Okay, so Gavin, we'll come back to Paula, don't worry.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate that.
I think including the pro comments is a good idea. I think the addition of the Envision Cambridge is a good idea. And I think that, you know, we're making every effort to include Ron's statement. So I think that makes sense as well.
Okay, that's pretty succinct. Bill Dines.
Yeah, Charlie, I support the additional comments on the pros and cons as it's integrated into just ahead of the matters of public concern. I think I would move to have Ron's alternative views moved to the appendix and not part of this. We already addressed the public matters of concern that he brought up. So I think the alternative view should just be included in the report as an addendum at the end. And I agree with Paula, it's a little long and lengthy and somewhat repetitive of some of the matters of concerns that were already stated in this section.
Okay, Francesca.
Yeah, I find myself in agreement again. Sorry for being boring with Gavin. I would say, I mean, to some degree, I think it would be important to include Ron's comment in an appendix. Otherwise, it does seem like he's getting more weight than anybody else. And with all due respect, I don't think that anybody here should get more weight than anyone else as a team. Not to mention, if background says something, you're not with all due respect, Ron, but you're not a publicist, urban planner, nor a well-graded professor at MIT or in architecture. I think that everybody's weight should be the same. So I think it's okay. We're giving him space, and it's right to show what we've discussed. But I would keep it in an appendix.
Okay. Well, Ron?
Well, I'm a little bit speechless. I don't pretend to have any degree in urban planning, but I was elected to serve on the study committee, just like you, Francesca. And what I've been doing these past few months is fighting to have the opposition voices be heard. It's not about winning. It's not about real estate in the report. If it were, you would realize that this report is 98% pro ECNCD. We're just trying to get a list, an unedited list. So I actually agree with Gavin that as long as we're deleting all the yellows, Charlie, those were the rebuttal format before you asked me last week to come up with the language. I like the pros and cons format that you have in this section where it lies in the text. I'm fine with all the pros that you listed, eliminating basically all the yellow parts because they're redundant, and just keeping the new suggestions that you have in red. But certainly not, banished to the appendix. Thank you.
So Rod, I'm sorry, you're suggesting deleting all the yellow highlighted text?
Well, yeah, if you recall, Charlie, my issue was that there was a rebuttal format that you were following that really took away from just listing opposition concerns. So starting on page 55, I don't know if you want to go there, Charlie, so we're looking at the same thing. I think that if we end with your pros, and I thought this was what Gavin was suggesting too, and if not, then I apologize. I suggest that we get rid of all the yellow because I objected to the format of the yellow at the last meeting, and you suggested that I come up with text, and I did that, and you've included that, but now it's kind of redundant and doesn't make sense to include the yellow anymore.
I wasn't making any comment about the yellow text.
Gotcha.
Yeah, well, honestly, I struggled with this. Ron, you've got a point. I think.
Yeah, I say keep it pros and cons, just like you have it. Forget the yellow.
Yeah,
because it's kind of a mishmash of the two, right? Yellow, that is.
Well, it is what it is. The pros are represented in outline form. It's just a simple sentence. Your cons, if I can put it that way, are paragraphs. I mean, I can do whatever the committee wants. I don't have any particular pride of ownership here. I was trying to represent the concerns in context and answer them.
So the pros is listed, Charlie. The red pros are about a page and a half, and the cons is listed are about a page and a half. And I think it's just fair and balanced that way. And it's the only part of the report that you're allowing us to get the concerns in the main part of the report. And I would appreciate it if we don't quiet these voices and or relegate them to the appendix.
Yeah, I appreciate that. And Ron, I appreciate all your hard work and the fact that you have actually provided language when requested, which is something I've been asking committee members, all the committee members for a long time. The fact that some of the language, strikes me as a little contentious or personal, is why I've edited and picked and chosen selectively for other places in the report. But I take your point about the redundancy here, and I'm happy to be guided by the committee. If you want to, I guess if you want to have a balance here, this is a balance that's represented by one person who obviously has talked to others, and it's not just Ron, I think, that we're hearing from. Not to put you down, Ron.
No,
there's been a lot of discussion, and
for a lot of people.
you've synthesized it all, and here it is. So
yeah,
that's what I'm trying to say. Yeah. What do you guys? I'm going to put it back on you guys. So Paula, I'm going to come back to you.
Okay.
You got a chance to think about it.
I have, and I'm focused because what I read was and annotated were Ron's comments, which I said I thought were too long. I think they need to be enumerated, but as presented, even though they're only a page and a half or a page and 2/3, I think they're presented as if it's almost another study. There's the study that the committee's worked on, and then there's another study, a counter study, and that's how it appears with all of the analysis. I think that it should just mention what the concerns are and leave it at that. Maybe another sentence, but I think part of some of the analysis is not really helpful because it hasn't been disciplined analysis. And I want us to be able to stick to things that are factual and things that have been vetted, but also balance that with representing opposing views. So that's my sense of pages 58 and 59. I actually thought about, I just had an opportunity over the weekend to read Envision again. And so I'm pleased that we've taken that, that you've taken that into context. I think it's very helpful.
Can I suggest we hear from the public?
Very helpful. So, Bill Dines.
Yeah, Charlie,
What do
we
you
spent a couple of months dealing with the concerns, the 5 or 6 concerns that Ron originally brought up. We
8.
tweaked this language. Appears that he's unhappy with that, so now he submitted another 8, and I think they're very verbose and too long. And the first paragraph that he has there before the number 1 point that he makes, I would totally want to delete, not include any of that. If any of this gets included in the report.
Thank you. We're not going to get personal.
No, I'm not getting personal.
Hold it, Ron.
I'm just,
Bill, we're not going to get personal here. Gavin.
I think that I'm fine including Ron's statement. I think that, I don't remember if I believe it is prefaced by saying that it is Ron's statement. I think that that's fine. I think that I'm fine with that going in. If we want to take out the redundant parts in yellow, I don't have an objection to that either.
Gavin, it also says that the committee does not agree with and does not condone these concerns. I say it flat out.
Okay.
Well, when you, excuse me, but when you present an opposing view, by its very nature, the opposition means you don't agree with them.
But I wanted to give you cover that this is not to imply that you are approving it. By approving of allowing the text to appear does not mean that you condone the text. That's my point, Paula.
Okay, well, okay, but acknowledging the concern. All right. I'm not a lawyer.
Okay. Sounds like I've got to take this back and work on it. I don't think I can edit this on the spot.
I'll print these out. I'll print out these pages again.
Yeah.
So I can be helpful.
Okay, well, it's 7:25 or so. I think it's time for public comment. Oh, the last thing I would is, we've already talked about the appendix. There's the I'll add stuff to the appendix, but there it is. So we'll go back to the beginning. Sorry to make you dizzy there. And open it up for public comment, starting with the summary page. And keep in mind that this is just one paragraph in a one-page summary that represents an almost 80-page report. So any members of the public want to comment on this summary?
Okay, Mary Ellen, you can unmute yourself.
Hi, good evening. You guys can hear me, right?
Yes.
Yes.
Mary Ellen Doran, 48 Spring Street. This is month 28 of this process, most of which I've been in attendance of. And Ron's original paragraph represents a lot of what I voiced through the meetings that I have attended. I feel that most of my comments were summarily dismissed without even reflection by the committee, sometimes with eye rolls. And tonight, they've been referred to as petty, and that as an opposition to this study, I don't listen, which is really offensive. So Ron has myself and my husband as two people that he is representing. He is not standing by himself. I did attend the March 2020 meeting, and I sent an email on March 9th to Mr. Sullivan, to which I stated that I was really offended by city staff saying at the beginning of the meeting that not everyone would have an opportunity to speak. I also want to point out at the March 2020 meeting, there were no set designated edges to the study district. And you can't say that the 12 people that attended that lived outside the district were not worried about their neighborhoods being included or not included, because I came to that meeting hoping that I could get my street kicked out. So that's what I have to say about this paragraph. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Alan Green. Alan Green, you can unmute yourself.
All right. Do you want me to specifically apply to this page, or do you want me to? I wrote my remarks about everything else going along. Just this page, because each time I got I have 2 minutes to talk each time. Well,
yeah.
First,
Yeah, you do.
Okay. Well, I want to say that I agree with the language as Charlie wrote it. And with the committee member and opposition's further differences, I think they should be put in the appendix or included as endnotes. I also would suggest that we add a parenthetical endnote that the committee member in opposition does not reside in the proposed conservation district. So I have other remarks for other things discussed tonight, but I will wait till time for that. And I live at 82 Fifth Street in the conservation district.
Thanks, Alan. Audrey Cunningham, you're next.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, I totally agree with Alan. Except that I also think, Charlie, I think before you had, which I think one of the members was in opposition to, you had comments after the, when you're saying about the disagreement with the conservation district, that it might include increased costs and deferred maintenance and just stifle creativity and all that. I think you had a comment after that. I mean, I think it should be, there should be a comment saying, you know, this definitely isn't factual. And it just seems as though one member of your committee is given more weight to his comments and his personal agenda. I mean, we live in East Cambridge. I'm in a National Historic Registered house. I am in East Cambridge. Everybody has to walk around East Cambridge and see what we're against. I mean, we're up against all this development, and I don't understand why one member in particular is so opposed and why it seems like his statements get given more weight. And he doesn't even live here. That's all I have to say on that page.
Thank you, Audrey.
And let me
Jean?
interject that we are, we're giving time to any member of the committee who wants to speak and wants to participate. And there is a range of views here. So we want to make sure that the range of views is represented. That's an important part of the process. And again, I hope we can not get personal. Who's up next?
Jean?
Yes, Jean Spira from 12 Sharapa Street in Cambridge. And I want to go on record as supporting what Alan Green said. I think his comments were well reasoned, and I think they made a good way of getting in multiple opinions, but in a very appropriate manner. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Jean. Marilee?
Hi, Marilyn Meyer, 10 Dana Street. Given the paragraph in Ed, disagree with these findings, that may be true, but I think someone gave another different language, difference of opinion or alternative views or something to make it more objective. That just may be a personal thing, but in general, I went to all the Envision meetings, all 27 of them or whatever, and there was a huge variety of opinion, and everybody there was basically pissed because they didn't understand what Envision was because it was never finished and they kept on running out of time. And on several occasions, there was grassroots voting down Envision at the meetings themselves. And I do not see any of that dissension written up in the government version of Envision document. I mean, that is totally, I find that this has gotten a little bit indulgent, and I agree with Francesca's comments that we need to stay with objective points here. And I think that Charlie did a very good job at bringing in the points that you needed to be brought in. Other people.
I think you're probably running out of time. I didn't have a timer
No,
going.
that's fine.
Not yet.
Not yet. I'm sorry, Marilyn.
Oh,
You
fine.
got 10 seconds, Marley, but you also can comment on future paragraphs.
Yes, I'll hold my fire. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank
Okay,
you.
who's next?
That's it for this page.
Okay. Yeah, I'm running the timer. Don't worry. Stone walls. Any member of the public want to comment on stone walls? For or against? No.
Alan has his hand up.
2 minutes.
I don't need 2 minutes. I'll be very brief here. I just want to say that I agree with the added reference regarding stone walls. I want to say I've heard the story of how this wall was destroyed without any consideration in advance. And I think that's a shame. I think the replacement wall serves well, but I think some kind of compromise could have been reached and there was no discussion on it. So given that, I think it's important to include protection of stone walls like this. Alan Green, 82 Fifth Street.
Thank you, Alan. Mary Ellen?
I want to agree that I think stone walls should be added to this. I think they're important. I also want to point out that NOAA released a study yesterday about water rising by a foot by 2050. So they're only going to be around for a short time. Thank you.
Thank you, Mary Ellen. Audrey?
Right?
I just have a quick comment. I was just curious why when they replaced the wall, they didn't replace it with a stone wall. It's not nearly as attractive, the wall that's up there. I live right across the street from it. And I'm just wondering why that wasn't done.
I can speak to
imagine it was a matter of cost.
Yeah, it's basically a lot of the wall, it's either not visible from a public way, and also it was done after we had the interim jurisdiction. So, the permits were pulled and it was all according to those.
So otherwise, would it have been, if it was under the jurisdiction, would you have required a stone wall, replace the other stone wall?
It would have gone to a hearing only on the parts that are visible from a public way.
Okay. Okay, thank you.
And we would have certainly used our influence to try to get the whole thing replaced in stone.
Right. Okay, thank you.
Any other hands for this page?
Okay. The study of rental values and that discussion and these, is there any more discussion about the study? Once, twice, three times, moving right along. The East Cambridge Business Association, I would point out that they will get another crack at this. I hope we can, when we've got a final report or a final preliminary report, that we can present it to them and hear from them again. Any public comments here, Sarah?
No hands raised.
Okay. This description, here we go, a description of the March 2020 meeting. And I'll switch back to, oh, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to stop sharing. Switch back to the text, if I can. So this would now, paragraph would now read like this. If you can figure that out.
Okay, Audrey, you can unmute yourself.
Yeah, I was at that meeting and it was terrible. They did say, I mean, I think this is very soft and, you're reporting it, but it's not really factual. I mean, they did claim, I mean, I was insulted and offended that they would say older white property owners. That's what they said. And it wasn't really tempered flares on both sides. They were just so disruptive, the people that were opposing it, that, I mean, I think to say that, it's like we were all involved in the argument. Eric tried to control the disorderly conduct of the other people that were in opposition. And I just think this is a little soft for what actually happened. That's my thought. I've conveyed that before, so.
Let's see, Alan, you can unmute yourself.
Okay. Alan Green, 82 Fifth Street. I want to say that the amended description of the March 2020 meeting looks good to me. I think it could be have a little more tooth regarding the disruptors being from outside the area, but I'll settle for this. Having attended the March meeting, I'd like to mention one wild accusation coming from one of the disruptors who lived outside the conservation district. And this should show why, whereby they claim that the meeting was not served by public transportation, so therefore it was invalid. That was erroneous because there was a 69 bus line three blocks away from where the meeting was being held, and the Leash Martis station was a 10-minute walk from where the meeting was held. So I just want to show how people were coming from outside, really with misinformation to hurl before the meeting that was basically supposed to be conducted along parliamentary lines of some sort, and that was totally disregarded.
Thank you. Mary Ellen, you can unmute yourself.
So I'd like to just go back to, I'm sorry, Mary Ellen Doran, 48 Spring Street. Ron's language that he presented worked for me for this meeting. It was lousy, but it wasn't one-sided, and that's unfair. And the number of comments that have happened during these meetings about everything from a nursing mother to berating people that were in attendance at that meeting is not represented in this document, and unfair, because while the opposition, while the people who believe that there were disruptors at the meeting felt bad about the disruptions, they were pretty harsh and really insulting during these meetings in recent months. Thank you.
Thank you, Mary Ellen. Jean Spira.
Thank you. Jean Spira, 12 Sharapa Street. I would say that I think this is, you know, a nice version of what happened at the meeting. I will say that I was seated in the center for some unknown reason, in the middle of the room. It was surrounded by long tables. And I can tell you, for one of the few times in my life that I ever felt very uncomfortable sitting in that spot, knowing that it was going to be very difficult for me and my two companions to get up and walk out of that room if things got out of hand, and they were pretty close to getting out of hand. So, you know, tempers did flare on both sides. I think they flared a little bit more on one side than the other. There are a lot of very negative comments made about residents of the neighborhood that I felt inappropriate and that I took umbrage with. And so I think, you know, this is a kind of a little pared down version, but I think it's fine to go with it.
Thank you. And Marilee.
This situation, this meeting, I was there as well, and one of the comments was against everything historical. I forget the quote was, I think we ought to take everything historical down and build new. Well, why come to a historical meeting if you don't even believe in the cause, so to speak? This particular meeting reminds me of the insurrection in Washington, D.C. When people are trying to present and do the procedures, and you have people banging on the doors, trying to change things. A couple of you have a line in here, the meeting became disorderly with some members of the public speaking over each other and made personal attacks on study committee members and to each other members of the public. That to me states it all. I don't know why you have to go into tempers flared on both sides. And you can take that out because you've already stated the temperament of the room, and older is ageist and white is racist. So I tend to err toward kind of softening factual for the longevity of the document and for the audience who's going to read it down the road. We don't need all the drama and melodrama. So thank you.
Mary Ellen, or maybe it's your husband. You can unmute yourself.
I just really take offense to the insurrection comment. That's all. I think that's crazy. Thank you.
Thank you. That's it. Anybody else?
Okay. Okay. Pros and cons,
Audrey?
including this statement and Ron's statement, the whole thing. Go ahead.
Audrey, you can go ahead.
I'm sorry. I just had a quick comment on that. It said somebody suggested, Charlie, you change the dozen to 12 on that,
Sure.
about the signatures.
I think it was about getting the correct number. So explicitly stating
Right.
how many.
Yeah, to put 12 up, whatever the actual number is. Yeah, that's all.
Yeah, yep, yeah, we'll do that.
Okay. Thank you.
Any other hands raised for this section? Alan?
Yep.
Go ahead, Alan.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Alan Green, 82 Fifth Street. The member in opposition's alternative views, if included, should either be condensed or placed at the end, as it is personalized to his alternative viewpoint. Overall, in my opinion, it gives an unfair personal soapbox to one member rather than countering with the weight of the views of the other members. So I think that should be taken into consideration, and we should pare this down a bit. It's really catered to one person on the board. Thank you.
Thank you, Alan. Marilee?
Just looking at this one prose page in front of us, I appreciate the simplicity of the bullet points. This kind of lengthy document, I know I do not like to read a lot of language. I do not want to wade through point, and have to think about stuff. I want to be spoon-fed information. And so the cons, I like the idea of bringing in envision to balance out where you're going and where the city has thought about the bigger issues. I also appreciated the quote unquote rebuttal format of the last meeting, because it explained some of the points that your fellow member was trying to make, and there was room for clarification. And so I commend you for giving as much consideration to other voices. I mean, it's extremely important, and there are some very good points. But it's got to be balanced, and I find too much language or too long language. It has diminished returns. Thank you.
Thank you, Marilee. Mary Ellen?
I just want to, I think it can be stated that many of us were opposed to the binding of the non-historically designated homes in the district versus non-binding to the homes that are not designated as historic structures. And even in the beginning of this meeting, during slide 2, Mr. Sullivan made reference to the fact that they were giving more weight to historically recognized buildings in the district, but the verbiage within the document weighs my house, which is not historically significant, with another neighbor's house, which is historically significant, equally, and both with binding all the way through the document. And that is not clearly stated in this pros and cons. Thank you.
Thank you. Anybody else? That's it.
I think Mary Ellen had an important point just now. I'm not quite sure how to build that in. Mary Ellen, if you have some language, would you email me or Eric? Or come back on and be more specific?
I would happily read through this and provide a couple of statements that will work. Thank you. I also would like to point out that there was a person who mentioned they were at the meeting on March 20th and they live outside the district and they support this. So if 12 people lived outside the district, you can't say they were all against it. Thank you.
Maybe so. I would point out that the boundary had been established and was publicized and talked about in earlier meetings. So it was pretty clear to everyone, should have been clear whether they lived in the district or not. But yeah, Mary, please get back to me about this. Okay. So where to go next? I think I have to take this section in hand again. I hate to string this out, but I can't edit it on the spot. And what well, yeah, I think I just have to get back to you with this, and I definitely want to incorporate Ron's points. I mean, the point about balancing this succinct list of pros with a succinct list of cons, I think has a appealing symmetry. And trying to do that in a way that would be fair to both sides. I certainly want to preserve all of Ron's language at somewhere in this document. So I will take that in hand. I'll consult with Eric and Sarah, and any communications I get from you all in the next month. You know, and I should point out my appreciation in drafting this list. One of the members of the study committee appears to have solicited, there's that word right there, solicited opinions informally, and then sent me a great long list of you know, supportive comments. And I distilled those down into this. So that was extremely helpful. So this is by no means coming all from one side or the other. We are getting important community input here, and I appreciate that. So dare I suggest we quit early and just go home or go to bed, as the case may be.
I vote in favor.
I see. Was that a motion, Gavin?
That was a motion.
It looked like Ron seconded. So let's call it a night, and we'll pick you up again on March 16th. We're getting closer and closer. It's like that curve, and you've learned about in geometry, the curve that approaches a line and never quite touches it. We're somewhere up at the top of that curve. But sooner or later, we'll bring it together. Thank you very much, and good night.